Good morning, everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started with our HMIS monthly training for November, which is the Looker beginner training. This will be a beginner-friendly training, so if you are already familiar with Looker, you may know a bit of what we're covering here today. And if you attended the Looker training in July, this will cover the same information. In today's training, we'll cover exactly what Looker is, how to think like Looker in order to get the most out of its capabilities, when it's best to use Looker versus a canned or pre-made report, Looker's interface, meaning the buttons and sections you'll see when you open Looker, Looker's models, which determine what kind of data you can explore, how to export the looks you create, and finally, we'll cover some advanced topics such as creating custom dimensions, table calculations, and visualizations. The advanced topics require some foundational knowledge in order to make the most out of them, but once you are familiar with the basics of Looker, which we're covering here today, you'll be able to use advanced functionality to customize your reports even more. If you have questions during today's training about general Looker functionality or the topics we're discussing, please enter them into the chat box. I will periodically stop to check out the chat box and make sure we're answering your questions. If you have questions about a specific report you've already created in Looker or something else related only to your agency, please submit a ticket to the HMIS help desk so we can assist you personally. Now we'll get started with discussing what exactly Looker is. Before we dive in, I want to clarify the four terms that you see here: Looker, Explore tab, and Data Analysis tab, and the Data Analysis tool. Looker is the name of the company that created and manages the tool we'll be working with today. You'll see Explore tab or Data Analysis tab in many of 2110C's HMIS materials, such as knowledge base articles and other training materials. The Explore tab is used to create reports using Looker, and the Data Analysis tab is used to access saved reports that were created by you or someone else at your agency or by 2110C. Finally, you'll see Data Analysis tool in materials created by BitFocus, which is the vendor of our HMIS. However you refer to it, Looker is a tool for exploring and explaining your HMIS data. Each piece of data you put into HMIS, such as universal data elements like clients' dates of birth, gender, race, ethnicity, etc., or project-specific data elements such as disability information and income information, can be explored in Looker to gain insights into the clients you're serving and the services you're providing to them. Exploring can be thought of as the process of creating reports, and explaining can be thought of as the process of using those reports to influence decision-making. To get the most out of Looker, you need to understand how it works and what its limitations are. Like any reporting tool, you can only get out what you put in. You may remember a refrain from HUD that the HMIS staff used to repeat quite a bit, which was, if it's not in HMIS, it doesn't exist. And this same thing is true for Looker. Looker has no way of using information that exists outside of HMIS, so it's important to understand what you've put into HMIS before you start trying to extract knowledge from Looker. Here we're covering a simplified look at the data analysis process. It begins with raw, unprocessed data, generally in a table format with columns and rows. After the initial analysis, you are left with information, which are descriptions of the data, usually patterns that can be seen in your data. Finally, after reviewing the information from your analysis, you're left with insight, which puts the information into practice. For more information on this framework, you can check out the article linked in this slide, which will be included in the wrap-up email you'll receive after this webinar. Now we'll look at an example of the data analysis process. Here we have a completely made up tiny data set showing us 13 client identifiers, the client's project start dates, and whether or not the client receives SNAP benefits. This fake data was pulled from Looker after a case manager noticed that towards the end of the month, she tends to frequently work with clients on food assistance. Since some benefits disperse between the 1st and the 10th of each month, there may be a pattern to her observation that can be seen in HMIS data, and the case manager thought it would be a good idea to start focusing on connecting clients to CalFresh. Looking only at the table in its raw unprocessed form, you're probably not getting much out of it. This is the data part of data analysis. No analysis has been done yet. After creating a simple pivot table in Excel, which is functionality that's also available in Looker and we'll cover later, we can see that the majority of clients who enrolled during the month of July already have CalFresh, and those with CalFresh enrolled in the project on or after the 15th. This is interesting, but it's still just information. Insight represents the conclusion of the data analysis process. A case manager thought she noticed an uptick in food assistance needs towards the end of the month and thought perhaps the agency should focus on connecting clients with CalFresh. However, when she analyzed the data, she found that the majority of her clients already receive CalFresh. By using Looker data, she was able to determine that an agency-wide focus on CalFresh applications wouldn't solve the problem. Most clients enrolling at her agency already receive CalFresh, and for whatever reason still need food assistance before their next disbursement. Because of the case manager's data analysis, the agency can now strategize other ways to best help clients with additional food assistance and resource management. In data analysis and data science, practitioners often say that all analysis begins with a question. There are a number of considerations and parameters to take into account when you're trying to solidify the question you want to answer with HMIS data from Looker. Let's look at an example scenario that we'll use throughout the rest of this webinar. In our example, you've identified a funding opportunity to help you serve a population of clients that have not been formally recognized as a priority for your agency yet, clients fleeing domestic violence. Your agency is not a victim service provider, meaning clients fleeing domestic violence don't make up the bulk of your clients, but you know you've served enough to need funding for special services for this population. Exploring your HMIS data is a great way to get information that can help bolster a grant application. Generally, you'll need to break your question into segments for who your question concerns, what interests you about this group, and when your reporting period should be. The who part of our question here is all clients, and there is no additional demographic information to add to our exploration, such as gender, age, or household composition. The what part of our question is clients fleeing domestic violence. The when part of our question will be last year in this example. Putting this all together gives us a clear question to answer. How many clients fled domestic violence into our project last year? This question gives us direction for selecting the fields and parameters we'll need to use Looker in order to answer our question. If you're able to log into HMIS and view the presentation at the same time, now would be a good time to do so if you intend to follow along as we go. If you can't log into HMIS right now, don't worry too much. You'll be able to see everything in the Zoom window, but it is helpful to follow along so that when you go back to Looker later, you'll be more familiar with the interface when you go to make your own reports. To get to the Explore tab, which is where you can create your own reports in Looker, click the menu button at the top right of the page in HMIS. Then click the Reports option. Your menu selections will look a little different from mine since my account is a system administrator account, but you'll have the Reports button there. Finally, click the Explore tab. When you click on the Explore tab, you'll see a list of models like the screenshot to the right here. Each model has a link that says Open next to it, which will open the Looker report building interface with the data from the model you've selected. Models are sort of like buckets of data with different fields and functionality available in each bucket. Typically, you'll only need the HMIS performance, client project descriptor, and services model. We'll quickly go over each model before we get started in Looker. The HMIS performance model will meet almost all of your data analysis needs. It requires clients to have a project enrollment during the time period you specify to appear in your results, and since most of you do not collect data about clients without an enrollment, this shouldn't be an issue. But for those times when you do need to analyze data on clients who may not have enrollments yet, the client model should be used. When you need data about the service items you've provided in HMIS, you'll use the services model. And finally, when you need data about your agency and project setup, bed inventory, or staff, you can use the project descriptor model. For now, we'll click on the open link next to HMIS Performance. This is Looker's interface, and this is the screen you'll use to pull data for your data analysis projects. We'll start on the left-hand side of the screen where you'll find your field pane. This pane is where you'll select the fields you want to include in your data analysis project, both in the data you want to export and how to filter that data. When you get started in Looker, you should take some time to scroll through the different segments of fields and click on the drop-down arrows to familiarize yourself with the locations of fields for easy access later. You can also search for fields using the search box or filter the field pane to only show dimensions or to only show measures. We'll cover the difference between dimensions and measures in just a minute. To add a field to your report, simply click on it in the field pane. Moving on to the topmost section, this is the filter section. This is where you will determine how to filter the data you want to pull. Looker automatically applies the enrollment reporting period filter, which allows you to filter for clients active in whatever time period you specify. The default is in the past quarter, but you can adjust these dropdowns to suit the reporting period you need. And make sure to keep in mind when you are selecting range for your reporting period, you need to add 1 day to the end of your reporting period. For example, if your reporting period is January 1st, 2019 to December 31st, 2019, you should enter January 1st, 2020 as your end date in Looker. This is because Looker calculates the end of reporting period using until before logic. So in our example, we're telling Looker to pull data on clients that were active until before January 1st, 2020, which comes out to December 31st, 2019. You can also use almost any field as a filter. To do so, find the field that you want to use, hover over it, and click the filter button that appears next to it. You can also create multiple criteria for the same field being used as a filter. Click the plus button next to the filter after you've added your first criteria to add another using that same data. Moving down the page, we have the visualization section, which we will get into during the advanced topics section of this webinar. Next, we have the data pane. This is where you'll see the data that you pull before you download it into Excel or start analyzing it right here in Looker. While you scroll through the field pane and click on field selection dropdowns, you'll notice in each field section there are dimension fields that appear in gray text and measure fields that appear in gold text. Dimensions make up the bulk of your field options. Dimensions can be thought of as an attribute or characteristic used to group data, such as client age or enrollment project start date. Dimensions are almost always pulled directly from HMIS. The client's unique identifier dimension, for example, pulls the identifier number you see on the client's profile page under the space for their picture. And the enrollment's project start date field pulls each enrollment's project start date from the project start date field on the enrollment screen. Measures can be thought of as ways to group data from dimensions. Measures are not pulled directly from HMIS, rather they are a type of calculation using HMIS data. Examples of measures include count of clients and average income change. Let's go back to our example of looking for the number of clients we served in the last fiscal year who fled domestic violence situations directly into our project. We've identified our who, what, and when for this question, and now we have to figure out how to pull that data from Looker. The who for our questions asks, how will we identify our clients? If the raw data is to be emailed or uploaded to the cloud or otherwise shared electronically, you should use client's unique identifier or client's personal ID. Client's unique identifier gives you the identifier number you see under the client's profile picture. Client's personal ID gives you the number at the end of the URL when you're viewing a client's profile. And selecting client's personal ID also creates a link directly to the client's profile that you can click on while in Looker. Client's personal ID is useful for reports that are meant to be used for cleanup and identifying data quality issues because it creates this link. The what for our question asks what are we interested in about our group of clients. We are interested in whether clients fled domestic violence right before entering our project. Luckily, this is a HUD data element and is easily accessible in Looker. We will make sure to use the entry screen currently fleeing domestic violence dimension. Finally, the when for our question is what is our reporting period? We are interested in clients who enrolled in the project in the last fiscal year, which is July 1st, 2019 to June 30th, 2020. We are not interested in clients who are active during that time, so we will set the enrollments reporting period filter to any time, and we will use project start date as our date filter. Remember in Looker, we have to add an extra day to the end of our reporting period. So our project start date filter will be set to July 1st, 2019 to July 1st, 2020. You may have noticed that in the what section of our field selection, I said entry screen currently fleeing domestic violence. This is because fields that collect the same information can appear on multiple screens. The screens are organized into sections in the Looker field pane, and these are the most common ones you'll be using to start out with Looker. Fields in the client section generally pull from the profile page. The entry section contains HUD standard data elements that appear on the entry screen or enrollment screen, and the entry custom section contains custom fields that our COC has added to the entry or enrollment screen, such as employment status, state you were born in, and any fields that are specific to private funders. The update/exit screen section functions the same as the entry screen sections in terms of where you'll find HUD standard data versus custom data, but they pull from either the status update or the annual assessment screen or the exit screen. You can identify a field section by looking at the non-bolded part of the field description once you've added it to the data pane. If you're following along, let's go to the Explore tab now and see if we can recreate this report. Try setting up the reporting period filters and adding the fields you see here to your data pane. As you're adding the fields to the data pane, think about other types of reports that might be useful for you to export from Looker. For example, you might be familiar with the program details report that you can access on the reports page. This report pulls all of a client's information from a certain screen for you, which can be very useful for a thorough review of enrollments, but maybe you don't need quite so much information. Maybe there are subsets of fields you frequently work with, whether for reporting on your agency's activities or for data quality cleanup, that you can add to a custom Looker report so you'll always have exactly what you need. Downloading this report and analyzing the results in Excel would be an easy way to explore your data if you don't plan on exploring that particular data very often. After we look at how to analyze this data in Excel, we'll look at a few ways to put in some work up front in Looker to make this data more accessible in the future. Now we'll briefly go over how to export your data to Excel and some basic Excel tips. To download your report, click on the gear icon in the top right corner of your Looker screen, and then click Download. When you click Download, another screen will appear with options for your download. First, you'll want to change the file format to Excel spreadsheet for the example we're working on now. Then, this is optional, but I find that it's good practice to change your results option to as displayed in the data table so that your column headers match exactly what you see in the data pane. This will be especially important if you create a report that uses the same field from the entry screen and the update or exit screen. Generally, you can leave your values as formatted. This means your download will be an Excel file that knows how to differentiate a text field from a date field from a currency field. Finally, you'll want to change your limit to all results to make sure that you can see all of the data that has been captured by your filters. If you leave this option as results in table, you will only download the number of rows that appear in your preview, which is defaulted to 500. Now we'll briefly cover some Excel tips for analyzing your HMIS data. These tips are not unique to reports exported from Looker, the Explore tab, or the Data Analysis tab. You can also do this with most canned reports you've downloaded as an Excel file. And just to note again, all of the data you'll be seeing today comes from the training site and has been made up. No actual client data is being shown. Once you open your Excel file, you can apply a filter to your report and use filters to look at your clients who fled domestic violence directly into your project. To do that, click the Filter button in your Home ribbon, which may look slightly different from mine depending on the version of Excel you're using, and then click Filter from the drop-down menu that appears. After you click Filter, you'll notice drop-down arrows will appear on the header cell of each column. To filter any column, click the drop-down arrow that appears next to it. For our example, we want to see how many clients fled domestic violence immediately prior to project entry. To do that, we'll click the drop-down arrow next to the entry screen currently fleeing domestic violence column, then click Select All to clear the filter selections, and click Yes to only see clients who answered yes to this question. The result of our filtering process shows us that we have 4 clients who enrolled in our project during our selected time period that immediately fled domestic violence. Another Excel-based way to arrive at this number is to use a pivot table. To start, click the Insert tab at the top of your screen, then click Pivot Table. There are a few different ways you can organize your pivot table to show you the number of clients in our report who fled domestic violence. But in this example, I've put the entry screen currently fleeing domestic violence field in the rows section so that we can see the distribution of no, yes, and blank answers. The values are a count of clients' unique identifiers. The Excel methods we've just gone over work best for when you need to accomplish something with a specific client's record rather than get information that doesn't deal with the individuality of clients. You might want to export our example report here if you want to identify the clients who fled domestic violence into your project in order to ensure they are receiving referrals to counseling, legal services, or other specialized services. So that took a pretty long time to answer a single question. There are easier ways to answer questions about a group of clients that is based on HUD data elements, all within Looker. Going back to the report we made earlier, we can move some things around to make answering our question a lot easier. This time, our reporting period filters are exactly the same. Enrollment's reporting period filter is set to any time, and enrollment's project start date is set to fiscal year 2019-2020. You may remember earlier that we learned we can use a field as a filter. We're going to do that now. In our example, we're not really concerned with clients who are not fleeing domestic violence because all we need is a count of clients who are fleeing domestic violence for our grant application. You might be interested in all clients' relation to this question if you wanted to look at the proportion of clients who have a certain attribute or experience. We'll cover that in the advanced topics section coming up. For now, we've used the client's number of clients measure, which you can find in the clients field section, and as you may guess, we'll give you a count of clients. When your field sections are collapsed, you can see a count of how many fields are currently being used from that section in your report. Here we have 1 from the client section, which is our number of clients measure. We have 2 from the enrollment section, which are the enrollment's reporting period filter and the enrollment's project start date. And we have 1 field from the entry screen, which is the currently fleeing domestic violence field. Finally, you'll want to save your look to be able to come back to it later and not have to redo all of your work. Click the Save Look button at the top of your page to save and name your look. The look will then be accessible on the Data Analysis tab under the System Reports dropdown. This functionality is only available to users with agency administrator type accounts. Now we will go over some advanced Looker topics such as custom dimensions, custom measures, table calculations, and visualizations. It's important to note that you shouldn't feel intimidated by these topics. They can seem overwhelming at first and like you could never possibly use them effectively. But these topics just take time, patience, and curiosity to learn. If you're just starting out with Looker, there's no need for you to worry about these topics yet until you have the basics down. This webinar's recording will be available on our YouTube channel for future viewing, and we've also released a written version of this training for you to refer back to as you get ready to start using advanced topics. All right, and I'm checking the chat. There are no questions so far, so just a reminder, if you have any questions about Looker, feel free to put them in the chat box and I will answer them for you now. Custom dimensions, measures, and table calculations allow you to dive deep into your HMIS data and can save you a lot of time if you need to regularly report on the same metrics. Custom fields are only applied to the report you are working in when you create it. In order to use a custom field on multiple reports, you will need to copy the code for each custom field into a text or word processing document and save it on your computer or cloud-based service for future use. It's also important to keep in mind that since custom fields are created by individual users, they are not HUD standard, they're not monitored by 2110C, and as such, they are not quite as reliable as the built-in fields you'll find in Looker. They are powerful tools, but they require a deep understanding of HMIS data to be used effectively. Each of the custom field functions are related but meet different data analysis needs. Custom dimensions should be used when you want to combine one or more dimensions. Remember, dimensions are essentially attributes or characteristics and make up the bulk of the fields you'll find in Looker. An example of a custom dimension could be female clients entering the project from a place not meant for human habitation. This custom dimension combines the client's gender dimension and the entry screen prior to project entry dimension to let you see the specific population. You can combine dimensions that are not in your report into a custom dimension. For example, you can select the project's full name dimension and your custom female clients entering from a place not meant for human habitation dimension as the only data you'll see in your pane, and the dimension will still calculate based on the client's gender dimension and the entry screen residence prior to project entry dimensions, even though those two dimensions do not appear in your columns as do not appear in your report as their own columns. Custom measures should be used when you want to create a metric based on dimensions. We'll revisit our example data analysis question of how many clients fled domestic violence to our agency in the past fiscal year with a custom measure that will calculate the answer for us. Like when creating custom dimensions, you can create custom measures based on dimensions that are not actually present in your report. Both custom dimensions and custom measures can be used as filters in your report. Table calculations should be used when you want to calculate something based on the data you've pulled. Table calculations can only use data that exists in your report as columns or selected fields, and table calculations cannot be used as filters in your report. To create a custom dimension, click the Custom Fields drop-down, then click New and Custom Dimension. As an example, we're going to look at female clients who are enrolling at your agency with a residence prior project entry of place not meant for human habitation. Custom dimensions require the use of Looker's proprietary syntax, which is somewhat similar to Excel's equation or function syntax. If you have created formulas in Excel, Looker's syntax should look familiar to you, but it's not exactly the same. When you open the custom dimension panel, you'll see a place to name your custom dimension. Try to make this as descriptive as possible. Next, you'll see a drop-down menu for your dimensions formatting. Usually the default formatting will work well, especially if you are outputting whole numbers or text. If you are outputting a date or currency, you can adjust that formatting in this dropdown. The custom dimension expression panel is where you will create your custom dimension. This is similar to the formula bar in Excel. This process will require a lot of experimentation and reference to Looker documents such as the operators and expressions articles, which will be included in the wrap-up email sent after today's webinar. This example we're looking at here is categorizing clients based on whether or not they are female and if they entered the project from a place not meant for human habitation. We start off with an if expression, followed by our first parentheses. Since we have multiple criteria in this expression, we need to add a second parentheses that will hold in our criteria before we move on to our outputs. Start by searching for your dimensions by typing a $sign followed by a curly bracket. This will bring up a list of dimensions which you can keep typing to narrow down further. I typed gender to find the static demographics gender field and entered equals 0 to indicate that I only want to look at clients where the gender is equal to 0. This number refers to the field number listed in the HMIS data dictionary. Some fields in Looker require the data dictionary's field number, and some require the actual text of the response option you're looking for. Unfortunately, this will require trial and error to figure out. Looker is releasing a data dictionary function in the future, and we hope that BitFocus will make use of it. But in the meantime, if you aren't getting the results you need, make sure to try both the HMIS data dictionary's field number and the response option text. If you have trouble with this, please always feel free to enter a ticket with the HMIS help desk. Going back to our example, I typed "and" to indicate that there is additional criteria for our results and repeated the process for the residence prior to project entry field. The 16 you see here is also from the HMIS data dictionary. Using the custom dimension we just created as a field in our data pane will yield results like this. From here, you could complete analysis in Excel like we discussed earlier, use this custom dimension as a filter, or use it as a part of a larger report. You can create custom measures by following the steps we just used for creating custom dimensions, clicking on New and selecting Custom Measure from the dropdown. Or you can click the gear icon next to any field to create a custom measure based on that field and selecting the type of measure you want to create. Before creating a custom measure though, look through the list of measures that already exist in Looker. BitFocus has added many measures since we recorded our last Looker training videos, and chances are the measure you need may already exist. Our last custom field type is table calculations. Since table calculations require all of the fields you want to calculate to be present in your report, table calculations should be used only when you want to narrow in on data you've already pulled. In this example, I pulled a report using the program's full name field to show me the name of each agency and project on the row, the enrollments count measure to show me the number of enrollments in each project, and entry screen total cash income to show me the total amount of income recorded at entry in each project. I can use the table calculation to show me the average amount of that income by opening the table calculation module, which is the same as the process we just went through for custom dimensions and custom measures. First, I'll name the calculation something descriptive. Then I'll select the formatting I need. In this case, I changed the formatting from default to US dollars with cents. Then I've entered my calculation by dividing the total number of enrollments by the total cash income in my report. When I click Save, a new column entitled Average Cash Income at Entry will appear in my report. Now we'll move on to visualizations, which are ways to show your data other than plain numbers or text. Visualizations can be used for aggregate data. Here I've modified our first example question of clients entering a project directly from domestic violence to show aggregate data. I did this by adding the entry screen currently fleeing domestic violence dimension and the count of enrollments measure into the data pane. You can now see how many enrollments answered the question and each of the response options. I also modified the reporting period so we would have more data to work with as we look at our visualization options. In order to visualize this data properly, we need to think about what the data actually entails. We know that only adults are required to answer the question asking if they've ever experienced domestic violence. We could add a filter for adults only so our data is narrowed down so that it only includes enrollments where that question is required and will appear. But we also know that only clients who answered yes to "Have you ever experienced domestic violence" will be asked if they are currently fleeing domestic violence. This is an even easier way to filter our data down to only see enrollments where the question applies. Let's add the filter for entry screen domestic violence is equal to yes to our data. Now we can choose a visualization. Click on the visualization dropdown to open the visualization pane. In order to look at the context of all of our clients who said they had experienced domestic violence at some point in their lives and determine how many of them were fleeing domestic violence currently, we could select a pie chart which shows us the percentage of each response option. When using a pie chart, keep in mind that it can be difficult for people to accurately gauge the size of the pie's slices, so it's important to always keep data labels visible on a pie chart. It's also recommended to not use a pie chart if you have more than 4 categories of data to visualize. The dot menu in the visualization pane opens up a drop-down menu with even more visualization options. In order to see how common each answer is, we could use a bar chart which will rank response options from greatest to least. A bar chart is a reasonable choice for most data analysis you'll be doing in Looker. It doesn't work for everything, of course, but when you've got categorical data, it's generally a good jumping off point. If you need to keep track of a single metrics, the card visualization might work best. Here we've also added a filter to only show us clients fleeing domestic violence since we are focusing on that number. There are many resources available to help you choose the best visualization for your data. This one from the Financial Times is particularly thorough and covers many visualization options that are not even available in Looker, but could help you in your data analysis and visualization journey in software like Excel, Tableau, or Power BI. Each column represents a type of data, such as categorical, over time, parts of a whole, etc., and the visualization types that work best for it. I know this screenshot is pretty much impossible to read, but it shows you how much information is packed into this graphic. We will be including a link to this and many other resources in the wrap-up email we send after this webinar, and they're also included in the Looker Beginner Knowledge Base article. So this concludes the materials we had prepared for you today. If you have any questions, please leave them in the chat box, or if you have a specific question about a report you've already created or something else that's specific to your agency, please feel free to submit a ticket to the HMIS help desk. We will be sending a wrap-up email to everyone who attended today with some of the resources we talked about to get you started in Looker, and a survey to let us know if this webinar was helpful or not and how we can improve future webinars. And I'm going to put a link to the survey in the chat box right now. So if you'd like to get started on that, please feel free. And now we're going to hang out for a couple minutes to see if we can answer any questions. Not seeing any questions so far. So if you don't have any questions, we can feel free to end the webinar now. Like I mentioned, we'll be sending a wrap-up email that contains an article with all of the information we presented today and some links to some outside sources to help you get started on data analysis and visualization. So thank you so much, everyone, for joining us, and we will see you next month.